Facing a second crushing defeat in the Hormuz Strait, President Trump teases a major strategic move within the next 2 amazing days. Is President Trump growing desperate for a last-minute deal after facing Mujtaba's cold diplomatic snub? Does the U.S. military now urgently seek truce renewal as Iran reactivates missile production cities for potential larger conflict? Is the U.S. scrambling for any viable exit from this costly Hormuz standoff after the blockade strategy fails completely? U.S. President Donald Trump has signaled that the current fragile ceasefire with Iran may not require an extension, suggesting that the pause in fighting could soon lead to a more lasting outcome. In an interview with ABC News journalist Jonathan Karl, Trump said that amazing 2 days lie ahead, framing the near future as a decisive window for the conflict's trajectory. Trump's remark was interpreted as hinting either at a potential diplomatic breakthrough or at a forceful final outcome that could definitively resolve the crisis one way or the other. Donald Trump said, and I quote, "It could end either way, but I think a deal is preferable because then they can rebuild. They really do have a different regime now. No matter what, we took out the radicals. They're gone, no longer with us." Unquote. As reported by Karl, Trump also claimed credit for global stability, saying that without him, the world would be torn apart, portraying his role as central to preventing wider conflict. Trump made these remarks at a time when negotiations between Washington and Tehran remain uncertain, with no clear agreement yet on how the fragile ceasefire will evolve into a longer-term arrangement. U.S. officials are reportedly discussing the possibility of a second round of in-person negotiations with Iran, according to a New York Times report detailing ongoing diplomatic considerations. Potential venues under consideration include Islamabad in Pakistan and Geneva in Switzerland, as the current truce between the parties is set to expire next week. Turkey has also reportedly stepped in to help bridge gaps between the two sides and facilitate renewed dialogue aimed at resolving key disputes. Pakistan has reportedly offered to host another set of talks between the US and Iran, as noted in a report from the Times of Israel covering regional mediation efforts. However, America's demands continue to face resistance, with Iran refusing to surrender its uranium stockpiles as a precondition for any agreement. As per the New York Times, during previous talks held in Pakistan, the US pushed Iran to halt all uranium enrichment activities for a period of 20 years. Iran rejected these long-term curbs on its nuclear program, instead offering to halt enrichment activities for a more limited period of only 5 years. As per officials familiar with the discussions, Tehran was firmly against giving up its leverage in the negotiations, even in exchange for potential sanctions relief. President Trump reportedly rejected Iran's counteroffer outright, with the US aiming to completely dismantle or obliterate Iran's nuclear program entirely. Another major sticking point in the talks remains Iran's existing stockpile of highly enriched uranium, which has complicated progress on verification measures. Iranian officials reportedly hinted at the possibility of diluting their uranium stockpiles, but US officials remain skeptical about the feasibility and sincerity of such steps. Even so, both Washington and Tehran appear to be keeping the door open for further talks, signaling a willingness to continue diplomatic engagement despite the challenges. After imposing a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, Donald Trump has signaled a possible shift toward renewed diplomatic engagement. The US president indicated that he is considering a second round of negotiations with Iran, according to recent reports. In an interview with the New York Post, Trump stated that discussions with Iran could resume within the next 2 days. He also suggested that the proposed talks may once again take place in Islamabad, based on current indications. However, Trump's remarks appear to differ from earlier statements made in the same interview cycle. Previous reports had indicated that he described the pace of talks with Iran as slow and uncertain. He had also earlier suggested that a second round of negotiations might not be held in Pakistan. According to the New York Post, Trump had even indicated that European countries could host the next phase of discussions. This renewed diplomatic signal comes even as the US continues to enforce its naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. Reports suggest that the blockade, initiated on April 13th, has not yet produced a decisive impact on maritime activity. This is despite the deployment of more than 10,000 US personnel, along with multiple warships and aircraft. US Central Command stated that no vessels successfully transited the strait during the first day of enforcement. CENTCOM said, and I quote, "More than 10,000 US sailors, Marines, and airmen along with over a dozen warships and dozens of aircraft are executing the mission to blockade ships entering and departing Iranian ports. During the first 24 hours, No ships made it past the US blockade. And 6 merchant vessels complied with direction from US forces to turn around to re-enter an Iranian port on the Gulf of Oman. The blockade is being enforced impartially against vessels of all nations entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas, including all Iranian ports on the Arabian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. US forces are supporting freedom of navigation. 4 vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports." End quote. However, separate reports have suggested that some vessels may have managed to bypass aspects of the blockade despite these claims. Iran strongly condemned the United States as it launched a provocative naval blockade on the strategically vital Strait of Hormuz, escalating tensions in one of the world's most critical shipping lanes. Iran's IRGC Quds Force chief boldly declared that both the US and Israel will ultimately return completely empty-handed from their aggressive maneuvers in the region. Brigadier General Esmail Qani's pointed comments were prominently reported by the Iranian state-affiliated outlet Press TV on April 13, highlighting Tehran's unyielding stance. The US on April 13 officially launched a comprehensive naval blockade aimed specifically at stopping ships from entering or exiting key Iranian ports along the Persian Gulf. However, fresh reports indicated that multiple commercial and cargo ships successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz, despite the heavily publicized US blockade efforts. An Iran-linked oil tanker, along with several Chinese ships, were reportedly able to transit freely amid the ongoing blockade, underscoring potential cracks in the American enforcement. The Quds Force commander said, quote, "The Unified Resistance Front has a powerful and effective presence throughout the region, and is lying in wait for the enemies of humanity. They will pull out of the region without any achievement." Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghai, has also stepped forward to sharply criticize this controversial move directly on the social media platform known as X. The Iranian foreign ministry spokesman said, quote, "Can an illegal war of choice be won through a revenge of choice against the global economy? Is it ever worthwhile to cut off one's nose to spite one's face?" Unquote. Iran's military has issued a stern warning that any perceived threat directed towards its vital ports would inevitably trigger a much broader and more intense regional response across the area. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or IRGC, has explicitly stated that no port located in the Persian Gulf or the Sea of Oman would remain secure or operational if its own ports were targeted or hit in any way. Iran's armed forces spokesperson said, quote, "Enemy-affiliated vessels do not and will not have the right to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Other vessels will be allowed to transit the strait in compliance with the regulations of the armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran." Unquote. Iran is reportedly working to clear away the debris that is blocking access to its underground missile bases, according to multiple reports. The revelation emerged on April 14 in a CNN report that cited satellite imagery, as also noted by Iran International. The images reportedly show heavy machinery being used to clear tunnel entrances during the 2-week ceasefire with the United States. The entrances to these missile bases had earlier been targeted in strikes carried out by both the United States and Israel. One of the central aims of the war was to destroy Iran's ballistic missile program and weaken its long-range strike capability. U.S. War Secretary Pete Hegseth had claimed that the joint U.S.-Israeli operations had destroyed Iran's missile program. Hegseth also said that Iran's military had been rendered ineffective for years to come after the strikes. However, recent U.S. intelligence assessments suggest that roughly half of Iran's missile launchers are still intact. Experts cited by CNN said this kind of activity reflects the design and purpose of Iran's underground missile cities. These missile cities are built to survive attacks, allow forces to emerge again, and resume operations after an assault. The research associate said, quote, "A ceasefire requires you to accept that your adversary is going to reconstitute some of their military capacity that you just spent a bunch of time and effort and money destroying. This aligns with the overall concept of operations for the missile city, which was, you eat the first attack, dig yourself out, and then launch again," unquote.